There are no coincidences in the kingdom of God. If you find yourself reading these words, it is because you were meant to. Divine providence has guided you here, just as surely as the rising sun follows the night. You have prayed, waited, and wondered, perhaps even doubted. But take heart, for the long-awaited breakthrough is nearer than you imagine. God, who sees beyond time, has woven your struggles into a greater design. What seemed like delay was preparation. What felt like lack was refinement. Now, as the dawn of abundance breaks upon your life, you will witness His love in a way that leaves you speechless. The world may scoff, but the faithful shall see. Prosperity is not the reward of chance nor the fruit of mere effort, but the unmistakable signature of a God who delights in blessing His children. The hour is at hand. Are you ready to receive? At last he made his choice. Before dawn, Thomas packed a small satchel and set off. He followed the road out of the village, past the fields, and into the dense woodlands beyond. With every step, doubt clawed at him. What if this is foolish? What if I am mistaken? Yet the voice within urged him forward. The door stands open. After days of travel, he reached the base of a great mountain. Before him stood an immense gate, its golden frame shimmering in the morning light. There were others gathered, some hesitant, some determined. Many had turned back, unable to continue. As he stepped forward, a figure in radiant garments appeared before him. "You have come far," the figure said, his eyes both kind and piercing. "But know this, many are called, but few are chosen." Thomas swallowed. "How do I know if I am chosen?" "You would not be here if you were not called," the figure replied. "But to enter, you must leave behind all that binds you. Fear, doubt, the comforts of the familiar. The choice is yours." Thomas hesitated. He thought of his home, the life he was leaving behind. But deep within, he knew there was no turning back. He took a breath, stepped forward, and the gates swung open. As he crossed the threshold, light enveloped him, and he knew he had been chosen all along. Inside the gates, Thomas beheld a sight beyond anything he had imagined. The air was thick with music, a melody that resonated deep in his soul. The streets were paved with gold, but not the wealth dazzled him. It was the overwhelming sense of belonging. Men and women of all ages and nations walked with purpose, their faces alight with joy. He saw no sorrow, no fear, only fulfillment. A voice called his name, and he turned to see an elder with eyes full of wisdom. "Welcome, Thomas. You have answered the call, but your journey is just beginning." The invitation of the King. Thomas had always felt different. From childhood, he sensed a quiet but persistent voice calling him to something greater, though he could never quite define it. Others went about their lives, content with the ordinary, but he could not shake the feeling that he was meant for more. He had tried ignoring it, dismissing it as mere imagination, but the voice remained, gentle yet insistent, like the tide shaping the shore. One evening, as Thomas walked through the village, he noticed a parchment nailed to the great oak in the town square. The paper was old yet untouched by the wind, its words clear. "The King calls you to the feast. Come if you are willing. The door stands open." The message sent a shiver down his spine. He looked around, expecting others to react, but no one noticed. Merchants haggled over goods, children played, and travelers hurried past. "Do they not see it?" he wondered. That night, sleep evaded him. The words haunted his mind. "The King calls you." What king, and why him? He had heard stories, ancient tales of a kingdom beyond the hills, a ruler whose wisdom was beyond measure. But those were just myths, weren't they? Days passed, yet the invitation remained, untouched by time. Others passed it by, oblivious. Thomas felt an ache in his heart. What if it was true? What if he was meant to answer? The weight of the decision pressed on him. He had a life here, a predictable, comfortable life. Leaving meant stepping into the unknown. "Do you mean?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The elder smiled. "The king does not call us simply to enter his kingdom, but to serve it. The world outside remains in darkness, and there are others who, like you once were, hesitate at the threshold. Your task is to help them see." Thomas felt the weight of the words. He had spent so long searching for meaning, and now he understood. He had been chosen not just to receive, but to give. As he took his first steps into the radiant city, he knew that he had been called not for his sake alone, but for the countless others still wandering at night, and in that moment, he embraced his calling joyfully, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. The hidden life. Elias had always known there was something different about him. From a young age, he sensed truths others could not see, as if his soul had been tuned to a frequency beyond the grasp of ordinary ears. His insights into Scripture were deeper, his prayers more fervent, and his visions, the visions, were filled with celestial wonder. But he also learned, painfully, that not everyone welcomed such wisdom. It began when he was still a boy. In his innocence, he had shared a dream with a group of elders, a vision of a great tree whose golden roots stretched into the heavens. He had spoken of its branches, each bearing fruit that glowed like the morning sun. But instead of listening, the elders scoffed. "A child's fancy," one had said. "Presumption," muttered another. That night Elias wept, not because they did not believe, but because they refused to see. As the years passed, he grew wiser. He read the words of the Master, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine." Matthew 7, verse 6. And so he became careful. He did not cease to shine, but learned to guard his light. He spoke only to those who hungered for truth, those whose hearts, like fertile soil, were ready to receive. One day, a stranger arrived in the village, a man named Lucius. He was well-spoken, respected, and yet there was something in his eyes that unsettled Elias. "I have heard of you," Lucius said, smiling. "They say you see things. They say you know the deep things of God. Tell me, what have you seen?" Elias hesitated. He had learned that curiosity was not the same as sincerity. "The Lord reveals his wisdom in his time," he answered cautiously. "But tell me, Lucius, why do you seek it?" Lucius laughed. "For knowledge, of course. If you have something great, why hide it?" Elias sighed. Knowledge for the sake of power is not the same as knowledge for the sake of truth. He had seen this before. Those who sought only to possess wisdom rather than be transformed by it. "Light is not given to those who would use it to blind others," Elias said. "Some things must remain hidden until their time." Lucius scoffed. "So you hoard your secrets, afraid of those who might challenge them? Perhaps you have nothing at all. Perhaps your light is only a shadow." Elias felt the sting of the words, but remained silent. He knew better than to defend what needed no defense. As Lucius walked away, Elias whispered a quiet prayer. He had seen it too often. Those who mocked the truth because they could not bear its weight. That night, Elias went to the riverbank to pray. The moon hung heavy in the sky, its reflection trembling upon the waters. As he knelt, he felt a presence beside him. Cloaked in a simple robe, an old man sat upon a rock. "You chose well today," the man said, his voice gentle. Elias looked up, surprised. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "A messenger. You have learned the wisdom of secrecy. Many are given light, but few know how to shield it from the winds that would snuff it out. Your words today have kept safe what was meant to grow. Had you cast your pearl before swine, it would have been trampled, and the swine would have turned to tear you apart." Elias bowed his head. "Then what should I do? Hide forever? Speak only in whispers?" The old man shook his head. "No. Light must shine, but only where it will be received. The Master himself spoke in parables, not to conceal the truth, but to reveal it only to those ready to hear. Your task is not to hide, but to discern. Share where the soil is rich, but do not sow among thorns. Elias understood. The wisdom of God was not meant to be wasted on those who would despise it. The truth must be shared, but not thrown carelessly before those who sought only to mock or destroy. As the old man stood, Elias asked, "Will I see you again?" The stranger smiled, his face radiant in the moonlight. "Perhaps, or perhaps you have already seen me many times before." And with that he was gone. Elias remained by the riverbank, gazing at the stars. He was not afraid anymore. The truth would always be spoken to those ready to hear. And that, he now understood, was the way of the chosen ones, the keeper of the hidden light. Elias had always known there were things too great for words, secrets whispered by God in the depths of his heart. But in his youthful zeal, he had once spoken too soon. As a boy, he had heard the voice of the Lord in a dream, soft yet undeniable. The vision had been clear. A time would come when darkness would fall upon the land, and only those who carried the hidden light would endure. When he awoke, he ran to the village elders, eager to proclaim what he had seen. But they laughed. "A child's fancy," they said. "Dreams are but echoes of the mind." Elias left, wounded and confused. If God had shown him something so profound, why had no one listened? After that, he spent years in silence, guarding his thoughts, afraid to share what had once burned in his soul, until one day an old traveler arrived in the village, wrapped in a robe worn by time, but carrying an air of quiet wisdom. "Tell me, child," the traveler said as they sat by the fire, "do you know why some truths are hidden?" Elias hesitated, then spoke. "Because not all will understand?" The man nodded. "Wisdom is like a flame. Expose it too soon and the wind will snuff it out. But shield it, let it grow, and it will become a fire no storm can quench." The prophets of old knew this. That is why they spoke in parables, why Jesus himself said, "Do not cast your pearls before swine." Some truths must be held close until their time has come. Elias felt the old wound in his heart close at last. He realized that revelation was not meant for boasting or to be tossed carelessly into the world. It was a seed to be nurtured until the soil was ready. Years later, when the darkness did come, when war and famine swept through the land, Elias carried the hidden light, guiding those who had once dismissed him. But now they listened. Now they were ready. The trials came swiftly. Crops failed, water sources dried, and fear gripped the hearts of many. Elias did not panic. He knew that true wisdom was knowing the truth and when to act upon it. As he moved among the people, he gave counsel, not all at once, but in pieces. Just as a builder lays stones carefully, ensuring the foundation is strong, one night a desperate man confronted Elias, demanding answers. "If you knew what was coming, why did you not warn us sooner?" Elias met his gaze with compassion. "Would you have believed me then? Would you have listened when life was abundant, when peace surrounded you? A revelation given before its time is like an unripe fruit. It will not nourish, but may bring sickness. When the hunger for truth is great, your hearts are prepared." The man fell silent, pondering his words. And as the days passed, more came to Elias, seeking guidance. He led them to places where water still flowed, taught them how to preserve what little they had, and reminded them that faith was not merely believing in good times, but trusting even amid the storm. One evening, Elias stood upon a hill, looking down at the village that had once doubted him. Now, fires burned in the distance, not of destruction, but of people gathering, sharing wisdom, and preparing for the days ahead. The hidden light he had once carried alone now flickered in many hearts. He had spoken not when he wished, but when the time was right, and because of that, his words bore fruit. for the chosen must trust divine timing when sharing wisdom. Not every revelation is meant to be spoken. Some truths must first take root in the soul before they can bloom in the world. And those who guard the sacred insights of the divine will find that, when the hour is right, their words will change lives. The veil of the chosen. Elias walked alone in the quiet forest, his thoughts heavy with an invisible burden. Though he was known as a man of wisdom and strength, his heart ached with struggles he dared not reveal. He had learned long ago that vulnerability was dangerous, something to be hidden like a treasure too precious for careless hands. He had seen what happened to those who bared their souls too freely. Their pain was often met not with kindness, but with exploitation. One evening, Elias sat by the river's edge, gazing at his reflection in the water. He remembered the words of his mentor. Even the chosen ones have weaknesses, but they must not be exposed to all. Guard your heart, for not all who listen do so with good intentions. He had always considered this a lesson in caution, but tonight it felt like a weight pressing down on him. Was there truly no one with whom he could share his burden? As the wind rustled through the trees, a familiar passage from Scripture echoed in his mind. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus did not bring all his disciples into his deepest sorrow, only Peter, James, and John. Even he, the Son of God, chose carefully whom to trust with his anguish. Elias closed his eyes, the lesson becoming clearer than ever. Vulnerability was not to be discarded, but rather protected and shared only with those led by divine wisdom. That night, Elias prayed earnestly for guidance. Lord, show me whom I may trust. Let me not walk alone, but neither let me be careless with my heart. The answer did not come immediately, but a deep peace settled within him. He knew that through prayer and discernment, the right people would be revealed to him in time. Days passed, and Elias watched the people around him with new eyes. He recognized those who spoke with empty flattery and sought to take without giving, but he also saw the quiet ones, the steadfast friends who asked for nothing, yet gave freely. And so he chose wisely, revealing his struggles only to those whom God had shown him. In their counsel he found strength, in their prayers he found peace. Elias learned that keeping one's vulnerabilities hidden was not about fear, but about wisdom. Not all who listen do so with love, and not all who claim to help truly seek to heal. But through divine guidance, one can find the trustworthy few who will stand as pillars in times of trial. Yet even as he found solace in the wisdom of selective trust, Elias knew that some burdens were meant to be shared only with God. Late at night, when the world slept, he knelt in prayer, pouring out the depths of his soul. And in those quiet moments he felt the presence of the divine, a comfort that no human words could provide. One fateful day, a crisis struck his village. A terrible storm ravaged the land, leaving many without shelter, food, or hope. Elias saw fear in their eyes, and he knew that as a leader he could not let his fears show. He stood before them, offering reassurance, guidance, and the promise of God's provision. Yet, deep within, he battled his uncertainties. That night, as he stood in the ruins of what was once his home, he felt an overwhelming urge to weep. But he knew he could not break before the people. He walked to the temple, where only the flickering candles bore witness to his sorrow, and there, in the house of the Lord, he finally let his tears fall. As he knelt in the silence, a voice spoke behind him. "You're not alone, Elias." He turned to see an old friend, one of the few whom he had chosen to trust. The man sat beside him without speaking, simply offering his presence as comfort. And in that moment, Elias understood the fullness of the lesson he had been taught. There is a balance between concealment and trust. There is a time for silent endurance, and there is a time to lean on those God has provided. When Elias rose the next morning, he was renewed. His burdens had not vanished, but he no longer carried them alone. And as he walked back into the village, ready to rebuild, he knew that though he would always guard his heart, He would never again mistake isolation for strength. For the chosen ones, wisdom is knowing when to remain silent and when to whisper a burden into the ears of the trusted few. And above all, it is knowing that there is one who hears, even when no words are spoken. The sacred flame, guarding your energy. Thomas had always been a man of strong faith, but lately he felt drained. It was not his body that was weary, but his soul. Whenever he met with certain people, friends, colleagues, even members of his congregation, he left their presence feeling hollow, as though something precious had been taken from him. He could not explain it, but deep inside he knew his energy, his spirit, was being depleted. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, he opened his Bible to the Gospel of Luke. His eyes rested on a passage he had read countless times before, but had never fully understood until now. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Luke 5:16. A realization dawned upon him. Even the Son of God, who had limitless power, recognized the need to retreat, protect his energy, and guard his sacred flame. The next day, Thomas met with an old friend, Peter, a man known for his wisdom. Thomas voiced his concern as they walked through the quiet garden behind Peter's home. "I give so much, Peter, my time, my counsel, my prayers. But there are days when I feel empty, like a candle burning down to the wick. Is it selfish to withdraw?" Peter smiled knowingly. "Not at all. It is necessary. Do you remember how Jesus chose his disciples? He did not let just anyone into his inner circle. He loved all, but was selective about whom he shared his deepest moments with. And he certainly did not let the Pharisees drain him with their constant challenges." Thomas nodded, thinking of how often he had been caught in endless debates with people who sought to argue rather than understand. He thought of those who came to him only when they needed something, but never gave anything in return, not even a word of encouragement. Peter continued, "Your energy and spirit are like a sacred flame. If you leave it unguarded, the winds of this world will snuff it out. You must learn to recognize those who drain you and set boundaries, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom." That night, Thomas prayed for discernment. The following days brought a newfound clarity. He began to recognize the signs of energy drain, exhaustion after certain conversations, the feeling of being used rather than valued, and moments when his joy diminished. Slowly, he made changes. He set limits on how much time he spent with those who took but never gave. He found moments of solitude, just as Jesus did, to recharge and reconnect with God. As weeks passed, Thomas noticed something remarkable. His joy returned. His spirit felt alive again. He had not stopped giving, but now he gave wisely. He had not stopped loving, but now he loved with discernment. And in protecting his sacred flame, he found that it burned brighter than ever. One evening, a young man named Samuel approached him after church. "Pastor Thomas," he said hesitantly, "I have been feeling so drained lately. I help others, I give my time, but sometimes I feel like I have nothing left. What should I do?" Thomas smiled, recognizing his past struggle in the young man's eyes. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Once there was a lamp that shone brightly in the darkness, but people kept taking oil from it and its flame grew weak. The lamp wanted to keep shining, so it gave all it had, but one day it had nothing left, and its light went out. Then the lamp learned a great truth. It must guard its oil, refill it regularly, and only give when it has enough to share. Do you understand?" Samuel nodded slowly. "So you're saying I need to guard my energy just as I guard my faith?" "Exactly," Thomas said. "Jesus did the same. He knew when to give and when to step away to pray. If he needed that balance, how much more do we?" From that day forward, Thomas continued to teach others the importance of guarding their sacred flame. He still gave, still served, but he did so with wisdom, and in doing so he found not only strength but peace. For those who carry the light, guarding it is not a sign of weakness but of wisdom. And in that wisdom one finds true strength. The sacred presence. Nathanael walked through the bustling city streets, his heart heavy with an unseen weight. He had always known that his presence carried something different, an unexplainable depth that drew some people to him while others kept their distance. There were moments when he felt it most, a sacred energy that shifted atmospheres, unsettling those who did not understand it. His mentor, an elderly man named Elias, had once warned him, "Your presence is not meant for everyone, Nathanael. Be mindful of where you walk and to whom you grant access." Nathanael had dismissed it then, thinking himself invincible in his faith. But now, as he faced opposition from those who misunderstood him, he recalled the words of Jesus, "Do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." Matthew 7:6. The more he tried to make himself available to everyone, the more he realized that not everyone appreciated the gift of his presence. Some resented, others envied, and a few even sought to corrupt it. His peace began to erode as he allowed too many voices into his sacred space. One evening, seeking solace, Nathanael retreated to a quiet garden on the outskirts of town. The air was cool, the night sky speckled with stars. He thought of Jesus, who often withdrew to pray in solitude. If even the Son of God needed moments away from the crowd, how much more did he? He felt God's presence like a whisper in the wind in the stillness. He realized that solitude was not loneliness, but renewal. He had spent too much time explaining his calling to those who would never understand it. Instead, he needed to protect the sacredness of his presence, reserving it for those who valued it. He sat beneath an ancient olive tree, letting the silence envelop him. He thought about Moses, who ascended Mount Sinai alone to receive the commandments, about Elijah, who heard God in the still, small voice after retreating to the wilderness. Great men of faith had always understood the importance of solitude, of stepping away to commune with God without distraction. Nathanael felt something shift within him. He prayed, asking for wisdom and discernment, and in that moment, peace returned to him. Not just any peace, but the deep, abiding peace that surpassed all understanding. It was as if God was whispering directly to his heart. Not everyone deserves access to what is sacred. The next day, Nathanael returned to the city with a renewed spirit. He no longer sought validation from those who doubted him. He walked purposefully, mindful of where he went and who he allowed into his space. Some people still watched him with envy or suspicion, but it no longer troubled him. His presence was a gift, one that carried weight, and like all sacred things, it was meant to be guarded. Days turned into weeks, and Nathanael became more intentional about his time and energy. He no longer engaged in fruitless debates or sought approval from those who neither understood nor appreciated his mission. Instead, he poured into those who were ready to receive, those whose hearts were open to the divine presence he carried. One evening, an old friend, someone who had once belittled his faith, approached him. "Nathanael," he said hesitantly, "I see something different in you. There's a peace about you now that I can't explain." Nathanael smiled. "It's not for everyone to understand," he said, "but for those who seek, it is always available." His friend nodded slowly, like a seed had been planted in his heart. And Nathanael knew that sometimes protecting one's presence was not just about guarding it. It was about preserving its power so that it could touch the right people in the right way when the time was right. For those who are chosen, not everyone deserves access to their presence. Embracing solitude is not withdrawal, but a means of spiritual strength. Nathanael understood now. His presence was meant to shift atmospheres, not be diluted by them. And in keeping his presence sacred, he had found the greatest gift of all, the uninterrupted communion with the one who had given it to him. The silent strength. Nathan stood before the council, his heart pounding in his chest. The city elders, robed in authority, stared down at him suspiciously. Accusations swirled in the air like dust in the wind. They had called him a liar, a deceiver, a threat to the order they had long upheld. The weight of their words pressed upon him, yet he remained silent. He had seen this moment before, in the sacred writings. When Jesus stood before his accusers, he did not argue, he did not defend himself. He simply stood, allowing truth to shine in the absence of noise. There is power in silence, Nathan reminded himself. A strength that words can never hold. The elder at the center of the council leaned forward. "Do you not hear what is being said against you? Will you not defend yourself?" Nathan met his gaze but said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was not weakness. It was a shield, a fortress against futile conflict. He had spoken truth before, but the ears of these men were shut. Words would only be twisted, used as fuel against him. No, it was better to let silence speak. Murmurs filled the chamber. The elders shifted uncomfortably. They had expected anger, justification, or pleading. Instead, they were met with an unshaken calm. The silence unsettled them. One of them rose. "If you have nothing to say, you must surely be guilty." Nathan could have spoken then. He could have laid out every defense, turned their logic against them. But a question echoed in his mind. Will my words bring light or darkness? He already knew the answer. His purpose was not to win an argument, but to walk in truth. Then something shifted in the air as if the silence itself was a voice. A few of the elders looked at one another, uncertain. Doubt crept into their expressions. Nathan had not fought their accusations with words, yet they questioned their certainty. One of the younger members of the council finally spoke. "Perhaps we have judged too quickly." His voice was hesitant, but it was enough. The tide had begun to turn. Nathan exhaled slowly. He did not need to fight this battle with words. The truth stood on its own. Silence had been his greatest strength, a force more powerful than argument or anger. As he walked out of the chamber, free from condemnation, he whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Lord, always teach me to know when to speak and be silent." In the days that followed, Nathan continued to live by this lesson. He watched as others exhausted themselves in endless debates, trying to prove themselves right. He saw how pride led men into unnecessary conflict, their words becoming weapons rather than instruments of light. But he had chosen another way. One evening, he found himself in the company of a close friend, Samuel, who had been accused unjustly of wrongdoing in the market. "Nathan, I must defend myself," Samuel insisted, pacing the room. "If I do not, they will believe my worst." Nathan placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Do you believe that words will change their hearts?" he asked gently. Samuel hesitated. I don't know." "Then let truth speak for itself. If you remain steadfast and let your actions reveal your integrity, their false words will crumble in time." Samuel sighed, still uncertain, but he nodded. And just as Nathan had advised, Samuel chose silence over defense. Days later, the truth emerged, and those accused him were ashamed. Nathan's lesson had held firm once more. Silence was not merely an absence of words. It was a declaration of trust. Trust in truth. Trust in God. Trust that righteousness did not need to be shouted to be known. Nathan continued his journey, carrying this wisdom with him. He would speak when words were needed, but never let them be wasted. He had discovered the power of silence, and in it, he had found a strength unshakable.